coming up on this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast.
We work largely in the anti-trafficking, mainly with sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. We're seeing generations now be changed. The young girl who'd been in the program and who had dropped out because she had had this incredible opportunity. She'd got a job in Saudi Arabia. They were all excited for her.
I already know where this is going.
You know where it's going.
Yeah.
We heard stories of people going for jobs in hospitals and offices and law firms and, professional jobs, going for interviews and being told, yes, you can have this job if you sleep with me.
Hey, you're listening to the Outside of Sunday podcast. Is your faith stuck on Sunday? Christianity was never meant to be constrained to a weekly church service. I'm Krista, and I'm here to help and encourage you to live your faith outside of Sunday. All right, welcome to this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. Today I'd like to introduce to you all Leanne Ellis, who's here to have a bit of a chat with us about the amazing work that she does from New Zealand, but it reaches all around the world, doesn't it, really? I thought we could just start with you just telling us a little bit, about yourself, obviously, and about Free Reign International and your role with them.
Okay, yes, I'm Leanne and I work for Free Reign International. We're a Christian organisation, non-profit, based in America, and I work, remotely, obviously, and sometimes in country for them. We work largely in the anti-trafficking, mainly with sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, so within the sex industry. We really have two main objectives within that, and that is to educate survivors of exploitation and trafficking and to equip fighters within the trafficking, anti-trafficking field. Okay. Yeah, so I'm the vice president on the board. I'm a lone New Zealander. I'm the only non-American on the only non-American on the board.
Oh, really? Not only the only New Zealander, only non-American.
Yeah, not the only New Zealander, I'm the only non-American on the board. So that always makes for some interesting stories and quite a few laughs, usually.
Yeah. At the New Zealanders' expense? No.
Yeah.
That's right, we can take it. Yeah.
Oh, they love our accent, hey, but there's multiple times where they, especially new people, that I meet over there, he'll just look at me blankly say that again?
I bet you get that a lot.
Yeah. So my role within that is quite varied. I'll do obviously visits to our projects around the world. I largely on those visits will often, particularly to our project in Thailand, will be doing aspects of sort of pastoral care with our volunteers there, our Western staff, although our program in Thailand is basically fully run by National Thais now, so that's it was a real beautiful plus that came out of COVID. Yeah, really? Because all our volunteers, our Western volunteers, had to go home, and our Thai staff stepped up, and so that's just incredible. That's what our aim would always be, is to to be nationally fully run. I do training. We have a whole aspect of our program that's called Injustice Response Training, and so we bring in teams largely from America where we will train them in the various aspects of this work. So
you're involved with training, organising and equipping people to help those in sex trafficking. Is it specifically sex trafficking or also just human trafficking?
It's largely sex trafficking and exploitation. Not everyone that we work with within the sex industry would see that they would necessarily identify that they've been trafficked, but they've definitely, everyone within the sex industry is exploited. So so it's can't always be defined legally as trafficking, but it's always exploitation. So I do that, and usually we'll visit the various, our programs, the students in our programs. Sometimes we have a church that we run, so I'll sometimes preach for that, and if it works, we'll go into the red light districts and do outreach there.
The goal obviously being to help victims of the trafficking and of the abuse to be able to get out.
Exit,
and not just get out, but to be placed somewhere where, because I know that you do the hairdressing, to give them a trade, you know, so that they don't just feel like they have to go back to
That's
there.
right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about giving choices, really, and about giving options. Very often within the sex industry, people will see that, you know, there's this whole thing around it being called sex work. It's just a job like any other, you know, and they're there by choice.
Oh, yeah.
And we just repeat over and over and over again, you can't choose if there are no choices, if there are no options. It's not a choice, you know. And so, yeah, we try and provide those options.
Well, and I suppose in places like Pattaya is the sex tourism capital of the world, and in Thailand, and obviously there's other places around the world, but people kind of say, oh, well, it's part of the culture, it's part of the way of life. And I suppose that's a bit of a trap in it, is that because it is such a part of the culture, it's not a good thing, you know, and just because these women grow up seeing this and then they in turn think, oh, this is how I'm going to make my money, this is how I'm going to get my freedom or whatever. That's not a good thing, you know, like just because it's
so an accepted part of the culture in many countries, particularly, of course, developing nations, where the poverty just creates such desperation within people's, you know, families and lives. And certainly within the Thailand picture, it comes down to I think it's part of the Buddhist belief that girls are responsible for the financial well-being of their families.
Okay.
And so education is limited. When you have no education, the options then are taken away from you. And so from very young age, that's, you know, an accepted way generationally to earn,
so
to
it's
provide.
generationally accepted. It's in a way culturally accepted, but we know it's not morally acceptable, and it's also not positive for these women at all. How do you counter that? You know, how do you get them out? Because you almost need to say this is something that you've been kind of trained and grown to know is okay and acceptable. How do you get that shift from acceptable to you don't need to do that?
It's education, and saying here's an alternative, we can offer you a way out of that. And in comparison to the numbers involved in this industry, it would feel like small numbers that we're seeing, you know, come out and be free, but we're seeing generations now be changed, the next generation with a different mindset. And generations come out, you know, that have lived in slums their whole lives and now have been given an alternative. When we were just in Kenya, you know, we have a hairdressing program, a beauty school there, and they've graduated over 1,000 girls out of that program.
Wow.
And they've seen 200 leave the slums to set up, you know, their own. They no longer live within that slum environment. So, you know, it's those that breaking that norm, because they say, well, it's just normal. It's just normal. That's just normal. That's how we grew up, you know. That's how we've been raised. That's just part of our culture. And we say it's common, but it should never be normal. And so that's a really important shift in focus for us. We know it's common. We know that the numbers are horrific, but it should never be accepted as normal. And so we want to offer you this other option.
I love that. And just a little side note for everyone, we did actually you were one of my first guests on the podcast when I first started. So it's really special actually to have you back. And when you came last time, we talked a lot about Thailand, but you've been spending a bit of time in Africa. I mean, how long was it that you went for? Was it a month?
Not quite. I think it was sort of 3 weeks or just over 3 weeks.
So could you tell us a little bit about Africa? You went there, of course, with free reign. But what was the purpose of going to Africa? Because I know you've been to Thailand many times. This is the first time to Africa.
No. I've been to Africa before, and so that's how this trip came about.
I see.
So it was a long time coming. So in 2019, I went to Africa because one of our original, even before we were an organisation, the first salon or training school was set up there in Africa in Nairobi, within the Mathare Valley slums there.
Wow.
And so I went with 2 other girls that work on the team with me, and we went to visit the schools there and just check in. Since that original school was started, I think they now have 3 schools in different locations. So it's about relationship, and just checking that they're all right. Is there anything that we can help with? And so aside from Thailand, all our other locations around the world are run in under other organisations. So we partner in with other organisations. So in Africa, we partner with an organisation, Missions of Hope International, or MOHI, and they just incredible organisation, just so incredible. They're right within the Mathare Valley slum there. They have multiple, I think it's in the 30s now, of number of schools across Kenya, and something like 27,000 students across those primary to high school age.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they run other programs, health programs, medical programs, social workers. It's just unbelievable. Yeah, they're incredible, the work that they do. And so our beauty program is just a small part of that. So when we were there in 2019, we were with the girls in the program there, and they were sharing about a young girl who'd been in the program and who had dropped out because she had had this incredible opportunity she'd got a job in Saudi Arabia. They were all excited for her.
I already know where this is going.
You know where it's going.
Unfortunately,
Yeah. And so she was days away from leaving. She was waiting on her passport, and
she was excited. It sounds like
they were all excited and for her.
All of them.
Yeah, there was nothing, no bells going off, no alarms going off for them. They just thought, wow, she's got this incredible opportunity. And they telling us the story, and we all went, oh my gosh. And we said, you've got to stop her going. You've got to stop her going. You know, this is not going to be what it seems. Yeah. Because false promises of jobs or even not false, she may have had a job over there, but it's domestic servitude for sure. The conditions and the hours and the pay and everything that and that's just such a common form of trafficking. Yeah, we were horrified, and I think at the time we were thinking about bringing a team of Americans in to train them in Africa and show them what trafficking looked like in Africa, which is what we often do with Thailand. And we looked at one another and we said, no, we need to bring a team in that can train Africans.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we came home and we put together a team and we trained them over many months, culturally, they were all people who were mission experienced, so they weren't any newcomers coming in that would be hit with culture shock and all the aspects of mission work that, they were an experienced team and experienced really in their knowledge of trafficking. And so we put that team together, and I think we were probably 2 weeks out from going in 2020.
And then COVID.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then COVID. Yeah. So then, of course, we that was it then for until last year. We said, right, we think we can do this now. So we put together another team, some the same and some not, and it takes months to put together a trip like that. So and we went in November last year to Kenya.
Yeah, and that's something I really love about the work that Free Reign does, is that they're not all about the whole white saviour,
Oh yeah.
It's not going to be all these Americans, it's not going to be all these Kiwis coming in and here, let us solve all your problems for you, rather it's here are some tools that'll help you, and can we train you, can we help you, and then you can kind of leave it for the local people, whether it's the Thai people or the African people, whoever you're working with, I suppose, and then they can carry the work on. Is that kind of how it works?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's probably not one of us on that staff team that haven't lived that White Saviour mission before in the early days.
So you've all been there.
All
and
been
you
there,
know
done that.
It doesn't work.
Taking the photos of the cute little kids.
Well, I think for a while there was this whole mission tourism that was going on. It was let's go on a missions trip. Yeah. It's going to be so fun. Let's take these photos. How great are we?
Yeah.
But it's like, how helpful is that really?
It generally is more of a hindrance than any help. Yeah. So,
so you're well beyond that.
Yeah, well, I guess we've seen a lot. We've worked with other organisations, good and really bad. And And so when we put together this organisation, we knew what we wanted and what was important to us. Yeah, we're really all about empowering the locals, the nationals to do the work. So,
but I suppose even if you were someone who was maybe into the whole mission tourism, you still had some kind of heart for mission work. And I'm not saying you specifically, but whoever out there who might be watching and they have done that and they, now it's like, do I feel terrible now about, should I regret my time doing that? Or rather, you have had a heart for missions at some point. Here is an organisation that is focused on doing it the right way, in a sustainable way, in a way that's going to impact and actually bring generational change, like you said, to the nations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just would never be doing this work if I hadn't said that original yes and gone on a missions team, and carried on going. And my heart never was to have that mindset.
No, that's it. The intention was good.
Yeah. And so it's just that now I've seen just a shift in the way that you can do things, just small things that that are less about you and more about the communities that you're going into. So.
It's that having the heart of Christ, like putting yourself aside and actually being there to serve.
That's right. Exactly. So,
all right, so you go to Africa in November.
Yeah.
You get off the plane. What happens next?
So I actually flew in. I flew to Thailand first and then flew into Africa early before our team got in. There was two of us that flew in from Thailand, and then our team arrived in the very early hours of the next day, and we kind of gave them a few hours to shower and get changed.
That's it, guys. Off we go.
Poor things. So probably by 9 or 10 that day, we were already in the slums with MOHI. Missions of Hope had an orientation with them. Usually we will try and do, if it's appropriate, we'll try and break down into small groups and do, which is what we did. We did a small a walk through some of the slum area. We'll take social workers with us and visit and pray through some of their families there that they're working with. Yeah, and then we started training. So this is a team that's come from parts of all over America, and the first time they've all been together in one place. And so we spent 3 days at our guest house there, running through their presentations, running through the material they'd put together, tweaking it wherever, tweaking time-wise. Yeah, working long days on fitting it particularly to the culture there and making sure that we, hadn't crossed the boundaries on anything there in that regard. So we did all our training through MOHI. They, because they have such a huge staff across all of their different programs there, we did 5 days of training in 2 different locations within the slum. We trained all of their social workers, their health workers, their medical teams, their lead pastors within all the churches, the head teachers from all their schools. Some people travelled, some of their teachers and staff travelled 15 hours to get to that training for a day.
Wow.
1 day's training, yeah.
Wow.
So it was a real responsibility, but a real privilege, to be able to bring that training to them and to have them respected in that way, and be so eager to hear what we had to say. So we trained across 5 different topics. We did a basic human trafficking training and what that looks like across the world and what that looks like within Kenya. We taught on what that looks like in terms of a biblical justice point of view, what that looks like within the Christian and church community. We did safety plans for within that environment, slum environment, for how, what to do if you find yourself in a situation that is dangerous. We did mental health. When you're living and working in that environment all the time and you are listening to these stories on an ongoing basis, for all of those workers within that organisation, there's a real risk of vicarious trauma. And so, where you take on that secondary trauma, you take on that trauma of the people that you're working with. And so we did some coping sort of mechanisms for their mental health and stuff like that, and what mental health looks like biblically, and that kind of thing.
So that's something that I'm really interested in too, like the biblical side of things, the gospel, the churches that you're talking about. Does that kind of go hand in hand with the trafficking? Or I was kind of imagining it a little bit as you're speaking. It's almost like if someone's about to fall off a cliff, you don't say, Jesus, like you don't tell them the gospel as they're falling. First you save them off the cliff and then you tell them the gospel. Is that kind of how that works?
Certainly when we the day that we taught the senior pastors, they had multiple stories where they'd had people come to them with these offers of jobs overseas, and there's impossible, dangerous or exploitative situations, and there's that aspect where they know enough to know that this is probably not good and that it's potentially dangerous, but the desperation is so extreme that they're worth
they
want it to be real, and they're worth, they'll see it as, we'll take the risk.
Gosh.
And so pastors that had just felt so helpless, not being able to sort of help these people. So I guess that was a big part of, giving them tools, to begin with. And I guess the gospel comes in a different way or comes further along.
But you're kind of partnered with these pastors in these churches.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So MOHI is full-on Christian organisation, deeply faith-based, and so it definitely walks alongside, hand in hand with the gospel, because that's what it is, love.
I would have actually loved to have listened to that, been at that day lecture. That
would have been
so interesting.
Yeah, I think we've recorded those, so I can probably...
okay, well, please send that to me.
Yeah.
But even like the biblical justice, like I would actually love to get into that. I mean, we don't have to get into that right now. Maybe that could be another episode.
I mean, we would never really, as an organisation, I think on our website, as our introduction, it says we're a faith-based organisation, but I feel like today, in today's world, faith-based just covers everything, and that's something you say to, like, BPC, and we're faith-based, and it really doesn't matter which faith you are. It means nothing. You can be any faith, and but we're unapologetically a Christian organisation, and so we cannot do. There's no separation. There's no separation.
I love that.
Yeah, there's no separation, and I just think you can't go into the slums and into those places, the red light districts, and see that without a knowledge that God was already there before you were, and that He will remain there after, because we're coming and going. Man, you'd just completely despair and give up if you didn't have that foundation and that covering that says God was already here, and as awful as it is to walk through, I mean, in general, we do that one walkthrough and that's it. We drive through the slums every day, but it's a very volatile environment. So
and you are equipping the locals to be able to reach their neighbours, their friends, the people in their community. Yeah. So you're not really there to, I suppose, go in and save everyone and take them out of the slums and do that. You're there to equip the locals to be able to know more about, I guess, the signs of trafficking, and also practical ways to get out, like with the salon that you were talking about.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
find another way to make money that's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, so MOHI has a whole huge vocational training program. So it's not just our beauty school. That was probably one of the first ones, but I met 6 girls learning to be mechanics or plumbers or
Cool.
something. You know, they were doing a trade.
It's great.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. Oh, plumbers. It was plumbers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I asked them, you know, what made you choose plumbing, you know, out of all the different programs they have here? And they said, we want to show that woman can do it, that woman, you know, can do anything.
Yeah.
And we see the great need for in terms of water within those,
Yeah.
you know, slum communities and
Yes.
good
Yeah.
good plumbing,
Yeah.
you know, like
A sewer line, please, or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
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 So yeah.
Would you say there's a difference between what you've seen in Africa compared to what you would experience when you visit Thailand?
The vulnerabilities towards trafficking are the same globally, really. Even across developed and undeveloped nations or countries, the vulnerabilities, you know, remain the same. There's so many similarities between the two. I mean, where we work in Pattaya is considered the sex tourism capital of the world. Nairobi is considered the sex tourism capital of Kenya, or Africa as a whole, I think it is, yeah. So, sex tourism capital of Africa. So there's many similarities, but there's different extremes. Yeah. And some of the extremes in Africa still shocked us even after all these years of doing this work. Yeah, there were still stories that came out this time that shocked us.
And I suppose in Thailand, it's very city, like there's bars. Are there bars and things like that?
That's a whole different aspect too. In Thailand, we would readily go into the red light districts in the various cities there. We easily do outreach there. It's not unusual because it's so touristy. And so you can go in and all the different nationalities and cultures are there, and families and, you know, children. And it's just very touristy. It's very neon lights in most of the places, and very acceptable to be in the air and walk through and to, you know, stop and talk to the girls or men. And in Africa, that's completely different. We do not. We don't go into the red light district.
For safety reasons?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so the work that we do is very much within MOHI and within the slum environment, and it's definitely a much more volatile kind of environment, and so it's less acceptable. You can't just walk around like we would in Thailand. And
So your time wasn't really spent in, you know, like in Thailand you would go to the bars and things like that and meet the girls. You couldn't really do that, so your time was more focused on the training side of things and the equipping. Okay.
So we are there's definitely the same areas of red light districts there. We've driven through those. There's bars, there's brothels everywhere, but it doesn't have that out in the open neon light touristy feel to it. It's very dark and so we largely work very tightly within the organisations there that we're partnered with, rather than just
wouldn't be safe. Yeah.
Okay.
Could you maybe just share one or two of the most impactful encounters you had while you were in Africa?
Okay.
I mean, we may only have time for one, but share what you feel on your heart is right to share.
I mean, just daily driving into that environment is very confronting. It's extreme for me. It's extremely confronting, but I also have this weird sense of belonging and being at home there, and so that's
that's interesting. Well, that's the Lord.
That can only be God, and I know that this is the same for everyone else that works fully within this. Is that it's not. I don't feel afraid or repulsed or anything like that. Seeing that those slums. I mean, we're talking probably close to 1 million people living in 3 square miles.
Wow. How do they do that? Is it vertical? Do
Some
they
of
go
it's vertical, yeah, and then just little, tiny little,
and that's your whole home.
And so to drive in and out of that every day and look at that out of the bus window and see the interactions within those communities, to see those kids, it's really confronting. But there's, for me, I feel also a peace in that environment. So that's a really strange.
Well, it's
just God's presence, it really
yeah.
is just God's presence. And it's a really weird thing to say, that's where I love to be, but I do. That's where I love to be when I'm overseas like that, is to be in the worst of the worst areas like that. Yeah, I really do. And so, that's impacting. I think what weighed heavily on us this time were the stories. Yeah. So every group we trained just came out with stories of, we know that happened to my sister, that happened to my cousin. Oh, I've got a friend that's heading off over to the Middle East in a couple of weeks. What do I do about that? How do I stop them from going? And story after story after story, and stories of, we also connected with another organisation there, a survivor organisation, and which, is really important for us to hear the voices of survivors. That should be probably top priority in any organisation doing this work, is to make sure that you have survivors' voices there.
Absolutely.
And so to hear their stories, some of them were telling their stories for the first time, and to hear the rawness of that. I think by the end of the 3 weeks, you sort of, you're pretty exhausted, emotionally, because it's a heavy weight, to hear that day after day, to hear and to think what you can do, what's the next step, what more can we do? What we've done here is just a drop in the bucket of what's happening here. And it's not just the overseas trafficking either, like there's just an incredible amount of trafficking occurring to other countries, even Western, America, Canada, anywhere,
So is that what is happening mostly in Kenya? Is that people are getting these offers and they're getting told, hey, you can leave the slum, you can come and live in the Middle East, and I've got a job for you. Is that the majority of what's happening? Or is there, what's the word?
Like deep bondage and domestic slavery,
Yeah, in the slums. So is the abuse happening in the slums, or is the abuse happening when they get on that plane and they go over to the Middle East, where they, where they've got this false hope?
I think the life within the slums is so tough and so often abusive that they see that as their way out. And so mostly in the cases of the survivors that we listened to, there was already countless years of abuse that had occurred before they'd been offered the job overseas.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so familial trafficking, which is when it's done by someone particularly someone in your family, that is next level. Yeah,
really?
Next level. Yeah, so huge thing. So the trafficking overseas is a large part, but the exploitation and abuse within the slum community, within Nairobi as a city. I mean, we heard stories of people going for jobs in hospitals and offices and law firms and, professional jobs, going for interviews and being told, yes, you can have this job if you sleep with me. And that we heard that story over and over and over,
Wow.
of people that knew people, friends, family, daughters, sons, cousins, and sexual abuse, just within the Mathare Valley and all the slums that are there in Nairobi, on a huge scale.
That was part 1 of our chat with Leanne Ellis. Coming up on part 2 next week.
And so they go to their mothers and they say, I've got my period. What do I do about this? And the mother will say, you're a woman now. You sort it out. So how do you get pads?
I'm guessing that they have
so
to
they exchange sex for pads that cost 10 or 20 cents or, yeah. You live it, but you can live it. God gives you this special ability to carry it. Yeah. And so it's not like you hear the stories and you see the sights and you see the extremes of filth and poverty and abuse without feeling it. You definitely feel it. It's just got to be that you don't carry it.
Many of them, as you say, are hungry for the truth of God, that God's love, and that he doesn't want you to put your body on the line for him. He put his body on the line for you. Yeah. And your body doesn't need to be crushed or abused. His body was crushed and abused for you. What a gift the gospel is for all of us, no matter our circumstances. Yeah. Congrats, you made it to the end of this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. Thanks for the support. Become an official outsider by liking and subscribing and leaving a 5-star review. You can connect with me on Instagram or Facebook. Just search Outside of Sunday podcast, and don't forget to let someone you know about this podcast.